But you guys have been a great team, and worked together. So we're gonna ask Luke to just share about his experience with the Wingfield ministry, and evangelism, and there's a few things to say about leadership. We're all ears, one way or the other. So,
One way or the other.
so Pastor Luke Weaver, thank you.
And just this word about Luke.
Okay.
He worked for me for a number of years, and then opportunity came for him to pastor a church in Harrisonburg, and he left and did that, and things did not work out the way they should have. And it was, it should have planned it to try to operate two churches, one traditional and Luke had contemporary. And basically, the pastor got threatened because the contemporary church was growing, the traditional church wasn't, and he saw himself as the lead pastor. They were supposed to be a team. So anyway, he left and came back with me, and then has planted a church, and it's really a unique church. I just like to say he's done a great job. He's reaching a group of people that have been either trashed or burned out, or the church didn't want anything to do with, and he's taken them. And I think many of them would not even be around had it not been for Luke and Sylvia investing in their lives. So I love this guy, I love his wife, his family, and it's been a joy to work with him. He was our pastor in charge of counseling. We did a crusade in central Pennsylvania, and the church has never forgiven me for stating it. The last night we were leaning up against a tent pole, and I asked him to consider it. And I don't think he was going to consider it, but thank God for Sylvia. She said, on the way home, do you realize what you just asked? She was ready to get up, that's right. She was from Alabama, and so it's been a good partnership, and I'm thankful for it. And he says I sort of lied to him. I told you, it won't be that hard. You should be visiting a lot of the places you did when you were directing festivals for me. So, and so we had a lot of good friendships that, as you know, you developed, and Luke's maintained those friendships, and it's been a good journey. So, and this word about John, I'd just like to thank John for the investment that he's made in our lives. I feel like we've learned a lot. I'm sure we still have a lot to learn. But, in 1970 when I got saved, recommitted or whatever I did, but anyway, my life changed. That fall, a guy by the name of Charlie Tremendous Jones came to Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg. He was sort of the guru of the first motivational speakers. And he said something that really impacted my life, and I think it's very true. You will be who you are today, 1 year from today, except for the people you meet and the books you read. That's very true. So don't ever take any experience that you have meeting somebody as just another. No, God brought that person into your life to impact your life. John has impacted my life and our ministry. I know Luke has learned a lot from him. John, we really appreciate that. So you're in for a treat if you not sit under this guy. Tomorrow and Friday are going to be important days. So listen carefully. Luke?
Yeah. So John, thank you for introducing us to Ben Case. So I took his 12 Habits of Successful Fundraisers seminar a couple of years ago, and there's probably going to be some promotional material where I got a little endorsement for him. So it's
In fact, he sent me an email this morning, I shared with everybody, about an online seminar that he's going to be doing about, I think, the 12 key points of fundraising. So,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I'll just tell a little bit of my story. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, probably all of us know it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. In fact, most mornings I pray that prayer at the end of my prayer time. And So my relationship with Steve is where I learned a lot of that. I'll start in Alabama is where I began my ministry. I was at a transition moment, probably in my 40s at the time. And my family's in Pennsylvania, and at that moment, my wife's mother and father were in Pennsylvania. They were approaching senior years, and I just kind of felt in my heart I wanted to get closer to them as they walked out those years so that we could be close by if we were needed. And found a church in central Pennsylvania to pastor, and moved there. Before we left Alabama, the church did a farewell for us, and I had a friend. His name was John Snow. His hair was white as snow, and he was kind of a substitute father for me. The night of the farewell service, there was a bunch of people who were kind of unhappy that we were leaving. He got up and he kind of had a sense of authority about him. And when John said something, he just didn't challenge it. So he said, I have two things to say. He said, this is God's will for Luke and Sylvia to move to Pennsylvania. I thought, thank you, John. Then he said, I have a word for Luke and Sylvia. He said, God's taking you there so he can get you where he wants you. So we're in the middle of a major move from Alabama to Pennsylvania, and finally on the long drive, Sylvia and I have some chance to say, hey, what did you think of what John had to say? Does it make sense to you? No, it doesn't make sense to me. Well, we respect John a lot, but boy, this sure does not make sense to me. Let's file in the back of our minds. Maybe 10 years from now this will make sense. We moved to Pennsylvania. The very first week we're there, the next door neighbor of mine was an old friend of mine who was pastoring another church. And he said, hey, we have this evangelist that's coming in to do a countywide crusade. Would you be willing to serve on the steering committee? Remind you, this is our first week in Pennsylvania. I said, I don't know about those evangelists. I participated in some crusades before, and I was less than impressed. He said, well, this guy was really good. He was here a couple of years ago, and we want to get some new pastors involved. And he showed me some material, mentioned a couple of names, which kind of endorsed Steve. And I said, well, in the back of my mind, I thought, what better way to keep an eye on the evangelist than get involved? That way you know what's going on. And as the plan rolled out, and I met the director, and he was explaining all the preparation events and what they were doing to prepare the pastors and the churches, I began to say, you know what, they have a strategy. They're not just blowing into town, they're investing us. The church got on board. We had a kickoff banquet, and you know the preacher is always good for a prayer. So I happened to be at the head table that night because I had the closing prayer. And there was another pastor between Steve and me. But I felt badly because it seemed like all night long Steve and I were talking around this other gentleman, and I don't know, it was a little awkward, but I mean, Steve seemed interested and we were having a good time. On the way home, I said to Sylvia, I said, I know I just met this man for the first time, but I feel like I've known him all my life. And she kind of acknowledged that that was the sense of it. So we do all the preparation events and lead up to the crusade, except about 4 months before the crusade, my father-in-law sang in a gospel quartet. And we had invited this quartet to sing a Sunday evening program at our church. I knew all of the quartet members except one. That one gentleman, after the evening, came up to me and said, God uses me in the prophetic. I feel like God has given me a word for you. Would you be interested in hearing it? And I have a kind of rule with that. I'll listen to what people say, but I don't let them know I'm going to get excited about anything, even if I may be excited about what they say. And he told me, he said, don't get comfortable here. God has something else for you. But the main message is don't get comfortable here. And I argued with him. I said, no, God's called me here. The crowd that was there on Sunday night was not our congregation. It was a lot of visitors. but we just kind of left the things as they were. Also in this mix, we were looking for a house to purchase because after the first about a year, we were feeling really good about things and wanted to make a purchase. So we lined up the realtor and took us around and showed us a bunch of houses. Nothing very impressive, nothing really what we wanted. But I remember sitting in our living room after that, we went around looking at the houses. And I said to Sylvia, I don't know, understand this, but if I had a house that I liked, at a location that I liked, at a price that I liked, I just don't feel right buying a house right now. Interesting thing about that was that realtor never called us back. You would think if somebody invested that kind of afternoon with you, showed you 3 or 4 houses, they would phone you back and say, hey, what are you thinking? And it never happened. So we get to the crusade, we go through the week of the crusade, which was, it was a Sunday night to Sunday night. It was a marathon run, but it was good and just really blessed it. I had just moved into this community. I knew the county superintendents, I knew the bank presidents, I knew all the pastors in town, I knew a lot of the key business people, and the people in my congregation were looking around like, oh, what kind of magic do you have? And it was just something, I'd gotten involved in a crusade. But you know what happens in a community when you do that. The last night of the crusade, I thanked Steve for coming because my trepidations about what he was, an evangelist, had changed completely. And I thanked him for coming. And his reply to me was, he said, if you'd be willing to move to Virginia, I'd like to talk with you. I need a crusade director. So I told him no on the spot. I said I didn't think it was going to work. I had just moved there. And what I didn't tell him was my wife was really struggling. And my kids were having some challenges at school as well. And I just, in my father and my husband brain and heart, I just couldn't see making another big move. But my wife was looking at it totally differently. She saw a ticket out of that place, and she was ready to go. She would come home, and maybe the ladies would get together for a dinner, and she'd tell me, so Luke, they laughed about this. What was so funny about it? And it was just, it's cultural stuff and regional stuff that's going on, and she was clueless about it. So that's when she said to me, do you know what you've been asked to do? And I said, no, probably not. The second thing is, do you know who asked you? I said, well, I think I know. Well, you just can't tell him no. So we go back to our house that night, put the kids to bed, and we stayed up till 2 o'clock that night processing the things I just told you. John Snow in Alabama, this other gentleman from the Quartet, giving us some messages, and just processing this stuff. Is this really what God was up to? And so about a week later, I just got in contact with Steve, and I said, I'm interested. Why don't you send me a job description? And then I didn't hear anything from him from August until the end of the year. But around January, he got in touch with me, and things moved quickly, and by June, we moved to Harrisonburg. And I started my stint as a crusade director. Jim Harrison was the crusade director for the event that we had done in Pennsylvania. Jim is now on the pastoral staff at the Nazarene Church in our town, and he's been on that ever since he left Steve. Every time I direct an event, at least the first couple of years, it was like, okay, what would Jim do in this situation? Those of you who've done some crusade directing, that's what you do. And it was good enough to get me through those early years. But as I look back over this, trust God with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. One of my responsibilities was to go out and recruit the invitations for these crusades. And Steve is not as well known as Luis Palau maybe. But I would sit down with a group of pastors, and there would always be one or two, and it was usually a pastor that had been a part of a Steve crusade somewhere else and moved into a new community and said, this is going to be great, this is going to be good. And here was my pitch. I would say, look, those of you who don't know Steve Wingfield, let me tell you, I was in the same seat that you were. He came into our town, and let me tell you what he did. And I would just lay out the basic line of preparation. And I would tell some, they always want to know how you handle money, so you would always tell them that, answer that question. And I would say, this is what you can expect. I wouldn't make any promises, but here's some of the things. There's going to be unity in your city. Your people are going to get fired up about sharing the gospel. There are going to be people who are going to commit their lives to Christ. And your city will be changed forever because of it. And it's interesting, God had to move me to Pennsylvania before he could get me to Virginia, because I had to view the whole crusade model and event from the vision of a local pastor. And that was my selling point. And I could see, as you would talk to groups, that was, they connected with that. Excuse me. Probably the other thing I would tell you about the crusade, well, maybe two other things. I told somebody this. I don't remember all the organizations that we were a part of, but about once a year we would go to a Mission America conference or a Penn Network conference, and that's where, those of you who I do know, that's where we probably touched base at some time. But I was sitting in a meeting with Sterling Houston, was Billy Graham's director of crusades, and another gentleman. He was the evangelist out of Chesapeake. Do you remember him?
Boyd.
Bob Boyd was in there. And he said, I'm ready to hire my first staff person. Would you? He said, what do I look for? What do I need to hire? And Sterling told him, you need to hire an event director, a crusade director. And Bob says, well, what does a crusade director need to do? And he says, he goes through a number of things. He says, well, he said they have to have a passion for evangelism. He said they need to have an administrative bent and mindset. They need to be a teacher. And there was maybe one other thing. But as I sat there listening to this conversation, I felt like Sterling was describing me. And at that moment I knew I was in the spot that God wanted me to be. So one other story then about being a crusade director is like going to Israel, the Holy Land. If you've ever been there, somebody asks you, well, what was the most memorable moment? And then every time you answer the question, something different comes out, right? So, what are your life experiences as a crusade director and being involved in these events? I think every time you answer the question, probably something different is going to come out. But if I ever get a little discouraged, I make a trip to southern Delaware. I always want to go find my friend Lou Everline. He was a part of a Methodist church there. He took the counselor training. And it was like this guy was so ready. He had a fuse in him. All you had to do was light it. And he was a part of the crusade. He was a counselor there. He was there every night. He was praying with people. And he went from not knowing what to do and no confidence in doing it to he was off and running. That crusade was 15 years or more, and whenever I see him, he always has a story. He shared the gospel with someone. Who was it? Did Graham say it takes 10 years to see the real impact of a crusade? That I think illustrates it.
When I hired him, I think I can do all this, but I can't do the fundraising.
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell me?
Yeah, Steve, we were in the interview process, and it was that final interview where it was like he was going to offer me the job, and I was going to say yes, I could do it. I told him, I said, I think I can do everything you need to do, except that fundraising. And then I maybe did tell a little lie. I said, I'm willing to learn if you'll teach me. now that is one of my major responsibilities, which is quite a surprise to me. I tell people I do a lot of things. I'd wash dishes, I would dig ditches, but 30, 40 years ago, if you told me I was going to be involved in raising money, I say I'll do a lot of things before I will do that. But
So what changed?
well, the key to fundraising, I think, is natural relationships. People don't give unless they want to give. And they don't want to give unless they know you and know your heart and know your passion. And Steve I like working with Steve because he doesn't put any pressure on you most of the time. But it's friend raising and it's building that relationship. And one of the largest gifts that I was a part of happened right here in this property.
That's right.
It was a gentleman that had been the general chair for a crusade we did in southern Pennsylvania. And Steve and I worked to get him out here, kept talking to him about it, and these were conversations that went on for 3/4 of a year. He kept saying, well, I'd like to go see the property. Well, that was in the fall of the year, and he said, let's wait till the spring. And in the spring, he said, I don't want to go on a cold, rainy day. I want it to be nice and warm. And we finally got the day. Steve was here, had lunch ready for us. I ran to Pennsylvania, picked him up, brought him here. We drove him around, showed him the property. We were sitting down by the farmhouse. And the day before I'd asked Steve, I said, are you going to ask him for his gift tomorrow? And Steve says, well, I don't know. I said, I'm just going to see how it goes. This gentleman said, well, I got both of you together. He said, let me tell you what I'm thinking. And he challenged us to raise $100,000 from a variety of donors, and he would match it. And we were thankful. He said, I'm not done. He said, I want you to go find one person that will give you 100. He said, I'll double that. The man promised us 300,000. I mean, I was elated, but almost crying. But for that man, that gift was one of the deepest spiritual experiences of his life, I think. We know from his family it was probably one of the largest gifts that he ever gave, if not the largest. But at tears in his eyes, sitting in one of these ATVs, he wept. He said, I'm just a dumb farm boy. He said, I only went to the 7th grade in school, and God has blessed me so much. And he said, I have messed up. Tears running down his face. And that, I think, changed my view of what fundraising is all about by that experience. The beautiful thing is we raised the money in 6 weeks. It's incredible. So that is a lot of why we are as far along as what we are.
Yeah.
We want to be done, and you probably don't know how weary I am, and Steve even more so is, with just seeing this project to a kind of a finish line. But those kind of experiences are quite a bit of fuel for you.
The heartbreak of that one, I had that guy's funeral
6 months later.
6 months later. And I met with him. He was a self-made businessman. That's the 7th largest RV dealership in America, selling 250 RVs a month. I mean, it was huge. I met with him for dinner the day before Thanksgiving. And his name was Aldine. I said, Aldine, you need to start delegating stuff. You gotta quit doing some of this stuff, because he was a go-getter. He didn't take no for an answer for anything. And he said, oh, I know. And I said, Margaret needs you, man. You need to be careful. Oh, I will be. And the day after Thanksgiving, he was hanging Christmas lights in a tree in his front yard. They also owned a grocery store. He went over and got the lift from the grocery store that's only supposed to be used on concrete. And he 90 years old, up in a tree, up in a lift, and it flipped, threw him out in the street, killed instantly. The night before Thanksgiving, 2 days before that. And this is one of the things you have to just commit to the Lord. He said, I'm not done over it yet. He said, I've given my boys the stores, and I'm giving everything else away. And he said, I'm going to put Lodestar Mountain in my state. And he gave away at his death $7 million, but he hadn't got to the lawyer yet. So that's one of the things you have to just commit to the Lord and say,
Yeah.
Lord, you know, I'm sure John, you can some things. So,
But again, it goes back to faithfulness. The Lord's in control. He owns it all anyway. And so, didn't come from Alden, it'll come from somebody else. I thought Luke and I have made a great team, and I'm honored to work with him.
one of the things as an evangelist, I would say your goal and your priority is to invest in the people that God brings into your life. And, I know I'm better because of Luke, and I pray that this many years down the line, he's better because of me. So, iron sharpens iron, so just keep sharpening people.
Well, and Steve, that's certainly true. I am better because of my years with you.
Luke, maybe,
Tell them one thing, then you can ask him a question.
Well, I came back from a trip one day, and you and Doug Cullen, one of our other directors, were in the office. What happened?
I told this story at a banquet just a couple of weeks ago. I needed something to kind of break the ice. I had just started with working for Steve. There was another gentleman that was the director of he was the director of the Encounter Ministries, our crusade ministry. I was one of the crusade directors. I was in his office and I saw Steve pull into the parking lot, and Doug saw him as well. He got up and he closed the door, and I thought, kind of like, what's going on? I said, Steve's been gone for almost a week. You don't want to say hi to him? And he says, I don't want to talk to him right now. He's going to come in here with a whole bunch of ideas, and I don't have time to get done what he already told me about.
But they still love me. In fact, I talked to Doug, he's pastoring a church now in Florida, and I talked to him the other month, and he said that he so valued his time with my son. At one time, there were 5 pastors or associate pastors in Harrisonburg, our hometown, that had worked with me. So, good training ground. Jim Harrison, one of the guys, he had pastored the church that I pastored in Rome. And he asked me to come down over special week meetings from which I did. And last night he said, I want to come to work for you. I said, man, you'll kill me. You can't do that. He said, well, you left, why can't I? So, anyway, he ended up coming to work for it. But the turkey got up there and started going to the Nazarene church and ended up pastoring Church of Nazarene. But we're good friends. Very, very thankful for all the people across the years that I've had the privilege of working with. I'm better because of them, and I pray, and I believe all of them would say they're better because of me. So, servanthood evangelism to me is not lording it over anybody, but it's serving the community where you go and your staff. Don't be a user of people. Be an investor in people. And God will bless you for it. I'm done.
good.
You're happy?
I'm happy. Yeah.
Tim, I can add one other lesson that I learned in these years. Just the impression is that when it comes to a ministry, whichever one it is, my experience has been primarily with Steve and his ministry. But I've been just amazed at the networking and all the pieces. You know, it's like a transmission with all those gears, and some are large and some are small and some are even smaller yet, but everyone have a key function. I think about, you know, it's the major donors that have been behind Steve for years and years and years, you know, and Steve has invested in them. And the ministry wouldn't be there for that. And it's the people who've served on the board over the years, many of them for many, many years. There's a pastor in central Pennsylvania who I think introduced Steve to about 3 or 4 different communities and maybe more.
At least 4, maybe 5.
And there's a couple of pastors that's what they've done. And it's, you know, the guy, we had this huge yellow and white tent would give you a heartbreak putting it up. It was a frightful experience. It was dangerous work. But the people that did that, and then the churches and the business people that came together, and all the many volunteers in a community, it was just kind of humbling to realize all the pieces that would come together to make an event happen. That just over and over, that impressed me as we were out in the cities doing those events.